I've just watched a disturbing YouTube report on ABC News regarding an increasing number of attacks on Asian Americans. Now, as a starting point, I do think it's important to differentiate between attacks that could be, for example, random muggings or assaults that may be spontaneous versus attacks that are clearly racially motivated. Um, the report featured a very sad case of an elderly Thai man, a Thai immigrant, and he died after being pushed over by a thug. Um, and that's what I'm calling the person. Pushing over a defenseless old person is a thuggish action. That's what I'm calling it. But sadly, he died of brain bleeding shortly afterwards, and it was hard to watch his daughter and son-in-law talk about their experience. Now, interestingly, the suspect in that case was black. You could see it in the video. Um, this was about a 10-minute report. The correspondent had an interview with an actor, an Asian American actor who is one of those kind of campaigning for more to be done about this. Um, since the start of the pandemic last year, there has been a lot of reports of attacks on people of East Asian descent since the start of the pandemic. And this isn't just North America. This has happened in Australia, in Europe. It is a real problem. So I don't think it should be downplayed. Also, whilst I think each individual case should be looked at on its own circumstances, I think it would be wrong to say, oh, it's all just coincidence. I do think there's credible evidence that there is a rise in this stuff. And unfortunately, in Britain, we're not immune from it. Young Chinese woman was verbally harassed in Birmingham last year, start of last year. Now, in that incident, the guys that done it were South Asians. Birmingham, that's likely British Pakistanis or British Indians. Um, but the interesting thing in this report, and something that doesn't sit very comfortably with me, is that they were then joining forces with Black Lives Matter. Now, the actor, I forget the guy's name, but he acknowledged that California particularly has a history of Black East Asian tensions. It was a major source of trouble during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, when there was real tensions between the Black community and the Korean community in LA over a lot of different factors. And he acknowledged that as an issue, but he also said that it's not just about one community. So I think he was trying to be quite diplomatic. But joining forces with Black Lives Matter, well, Black Lives Matter is very good about talking about unity and about fighting injustice together. But will they, as an organization, condemn black racists? I haven't seen them do that, not once. They didn't condemn Yusra Kagali, who vilified all white people. She was the co-founder of the Toronto chapter. They never denounced her. They never said, you're no longer part of this organization. No, people defended her. Um, so the optics of this is that Asian Americans are being attacked. They're being attacked by different people. They're being attacked by Black Americans, by white Americans. But the narrative is, well, let's join Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter as an organization, their whole thing is about the injustice from white people. So is that really a unifying move? I suppose in terms of patching up relations between the Asian American community and the Black community, but it doesn't sit well with me because I don't think Black Lives Matter is a credible organization as a unifying force. I don't think it is unifying. I think it's deeply polarizing. Um, they are real advocates of concepts like white privilege, which, in my opinion, is a deeply racist concept. Um, so that's only going to polarize a lot of white people who might otherwise be sympathetic. I mean, I still am sympathetic to anyone who suffers a racist attack or any attack. but the racial component is a factor in cases where there's credible evidence for that. Um, but there is nothing in American society, even the gun issue, even abortion, there is nothing as toxic as race, and that's very sad. That's true to some extent in Britain as well. This country is definitely not alien to this. Our issues don't run as deep as the United States, not anywhere near as deep. But we have had race riots, we have had tensions, and Black Lives Matter very much has a presence here. We're not totally divorced from this. Um, on the issue though of Asian Americans being attacked, I think it's disgraceful that anyone should suffer harassment or violent assault just because of their ethnicity. That's appalling. Um, and this has happened in many countries. However, I also think it is very, very, very important not to conflate legitimate criticism of China and the Chinese regime with racist attacks. Um, so a lot of community leaders are saying Trump's rhetoric last year fueled this. Um, I've mixed views on that. At the time, I sort of defended it because previous pandemics had went by their origin. So we spoke about Russian flu, we spoke about Hong Kong flu, Spanish flu, the famous example. Nevertheless, I think when those attacks were increasing, Trump didn't help matters, and it was perhaps insensitive for the victims to continue saying like the China virus, the Wuhan virus. I would be totally okay if he'd said CCP virus, um, or just call it by its name, the coronavirus. So now I'm sort of thinking maybe that did fuel things a bit. But like I say, it's you can't just put this down to white racists and doing it because it's not. There's black racists doing it as well. Um, that's why I have a problem with this allegiance with Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter, their whole thing has always been about white people. I believe they're a racist movement. I really do. So I don't think that's a progressive move. Um, but I understand why it's happened because it makes sense to have two communities that have had a history of tension working together. But I think it should be on, Black Lives Matter. If they really want to support Asian Americans, and they want Asian Americans to support them, they need to condemn black racists. That is something Black Lives Matter will not do. That's my biggest issue with this. BLM will talk about unity, they'll talk about injustice, they will not talk about black racism because, in their opinion, it doesn't exist. That's wrong. But, I've seen people hold placards saying things like Yellow Peril joins force with Black Power. Well, the message there is the whites are our enemy. That is the message, whatever way you try to gloss it over. Um, Yellow Peril is a concept that went back to the Chester Arthur administration with the notorious China Exclusion Act. We're talking the 1880s, and at that time there were, particularly in the West, massacres of Chinese miners, some awful incidents. So there's no question about it. The Asian American community has had a history of discrimination and racism, and I wouldn't downplay that. But recently I saw a Chinese guy, and I mean from the mainland. This wasn't like a third generation immigrant or something. This was a Chinese guy. He was a student studying in the States, and he had this post complaining about the fact that white Americans take issue with the CCP, and he was saying that don't associate us with the CCP. But the same guy, the very same guy, was denying the Uyghur genocide. He was excusing what was happening in Hong Kong. He was coming out with all these pro CCP positions. So my view is you can't discriminate against people because of their ethnicity. However, if they come out with controversial opinions, that's a different matter. So if you have someone of East Asian descent who is living in Europe or North America and they defend the CCP, frankly, they can't complain about then hostility. But obviously, that's not the case in the majority of these incidents. The majority of these incidents is just ignorant, stupid, racist people attacking innocent people for no other reason than their ethnicity. I mean, this elderly Thai man, that's, and even if he was Chinese, it still wouldn't condone it. They're not responsible for what the Chinese government does. That's why that sort of ignorance and racism does need to be tackled. Absolutely. 100%. I've got Chinese friends, and if some ignorant person was to hurl abuse at them or attack them, firstly, if I was with them, I would definitely intervene. That goes without saying. And I've seen it before. I've been with Chinese students, and they've got some verbal abuse even before the pandemic. It does happen. On the other hand, there are unquestionably Chinese students who come to Western countries and they're very jingoistic and nationalistic and they demand respect, but they don't show much in return. So I'm sick and tired of hypocrites who say, oh, it's the West, it's freedom of speech. That means that I can therefore um, be obnoxious and defend the CCP. The CCP right now is hated by much of the world and with very good reason. With very good reason. We are all suffering because of their lies. So I'm concerned that these sort of incidents are going to be conflated with legitimate criticism of the Chinese government, which are obviously two very different things. I mean, you can't compare someone like myself making a video criticizing the CCP versus just a violent, unprovoked assault for absolutely no reason. But then there might be situations that you have two people having a heated row, and someone says, well, if America's so terrible and China's so great, then what the hell are you doing here? Now, I don't consider that racism. I consider that a valid question. So, unfortunately, so much of this is taken up by emotions and not facts. Um, but, as a starting point, it goes without saying that racist incidents should always be condemned if there is a racial component. There is another risk that we could have a situation where every time an Asian American is a victim of crime, it will automatically be just to it must be racism, when that might not be the factor in every case. Um, and I'll always have huge sympathy with victims of crime, but I think in each case it needs to be looked at if there's a racial component. Clearly, if someone's shouting out racial slurs before the attack, then it's likely that that's a factor. Um, in the case of the Thai gentleman, the attacker's lawyers claimed that he didn't know the ethnicity of the man. Who knows? Um, these issues are not going to go away, unfortunately. In an ideal world, people would see each other as individuals. But I really do believe that organizations like Black Lives Matter, and I'm not singling them out, there's others, and there are definitely white equivalents. I mean, the likes of the Proud Boys and others, although probably that's not the best example because the Proud Boys do have minority members, quite a lot of them. And by the way, the assault on Capitol Hill, to call that a white supremacist thing was misleading. There were white supremacists there, but there was also a lot of minorities involved and people who had no allegiances whatsoever to white supremacist groups. I think that was more better described as a kind of conspiracy theorist situation getting out of hand rather than a white supremacist thing. Um, but it would be easy to say, "Oh, these are just American issues," but unfortunately, they have spilled over here, so it's relevant. Um, but there should be a common sense approach to this. When a community is under increasing attack, there needs to be solidarity. People need to be reassured that they will get justice, and any racism must be forcefully condemned. But I'm not sure about this message that we're being attacked, so let's join together with Black Lives Matter and fight our mutual enemy, which of course, as they see it, is the white majority. They might deny that, but Black Lives Matter is, in my opinion, does a lot more harm than good. There might be individuals associated with Black Lives Matter who are decent people. Like, for example, the guy last year in London who famously carried away the white counter demonstrator. Now, he's obviously a decent man. I give him credit. And he's obviously not a racist because he helped this white guy. But definitely, unquestionably, some of the narrative of Black Lives Matter is racist. Not least their hostility to the idea all lives matter. If if you are offended by that idea, all lives matter, then I would suggest that you are part of the problem. Frankly, it's fine to support Black Lives Matter as a concept, but if you're actively saying you can't say all lives matter, that's insane. Frankly, I'm pleased that some of our senior politicians are now starting to fight back against this forced conformity because that's what it is. It's like the video I made earlier on taking the knee. The idea that athletes should be pressured to do that to prove something is obnoxious. Um, and the fact that, left wing papers like The Guardian and The Independent are, lambasting Priti Patel, all she has done is said what a lot of people think. And I think a lot of people will support the Home Secretary on this, because frankly, Black Lives Matter, the only people who support them is their own activists and left-wing virtue signalers. That's it. The vast majority of people, even many people on the left, are not comfortable with BLM as a movement. Um, the vast majority of centrists and probably every conservative is uneasy with this movement, and with good reason. So Asian Americans kind of joining forces with them. It's not for me to say that they're not allowed to, that they can't, but is that really the best way forward? I think the best way forward with this is to demand legislators tackle a problem, to demand that they get justice, and yeah, to continue to condemn the racism, but also to understand that criticism of the Chinese regime is not the same as xenophobia. It's not. And I do see a situation where the two can get conflated. That's dangerous. So, if you're Chinese and you're supporting the CCP, do not do not dare say that is racism, because what that does is trivialize actual racism. On the other hand, if you're walking down the street and someone shouts out a racially derogatory term towards you or blames you for COVID, that's racism. That's the difference. That's what needs to be understood.